The mockery started at the grain elevator in Lamar's, Iowa, on a sweltering afternoon in late June of 1968. Dale Werner had just finished unloading a truck of corn, was standing in the parking lot talking to 3 other farmers about his plans for the summer. And when he mentioned building a machine shed, they thought it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. A shed? For a tractor? Ed Thompson said, actually laughing out loud. He was leaning against his new 1968 Ford F-250, arms crossed, grinning. "What's next, Dale? You going to put little rubber boots on it when it rains? Maybe tuck it in at night with a blanket?" The other 2 farmers there, Jim Carson and Bob Mitchell, started laughing too. They were all standing around Jim's pickup in the elevator parking lot, waiting for their turn at the scale, trying to stay in whatever shade they could find. It was 92 degrees, humidity oppressive, dust hanging in the air like fog. "Seriously, Dale," Bob said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a red handkerchief, "you're actually going to spend money building a shed for a tractor. Just park it by the barn like everyone else does. Like everyone's always done. Tractors are built to be outside. That's the whole point of them. They're work equipment, not showpieces." Dale Werner was 39 years old that summer, had been farming 240 acres in Plymouth County since he took over from his father in 1956, 12 years of running his own operation. He was a quiet man, didn't argue much, didn't try to convince people of things, but he had strong opinions about equipment maintenance, opinions formed by watching his father's approach and his grandfather's before that. He'd just bought a used 1963 Farmall 806 for $4,200 cash from a farmer near Kingsley, who was upgrading to something newer. The tractor had 1,850 hours on it, 5 years old, in decent shape, and Dale had a plan for that tractor, make it last 30 years, maybe longer if he could. "I'm building the shed," Dale said quietly, not defensive, just stating fact. 30 by 40 feet, concrete floor, metal roof and siding, going to keep my equipment in it, all my equipment. Protect it from weather, from sun damage, from rust. Ed Thompson shook his head, still grinning. "Dale, that's probably $3,000–4,000 you're talking about spending on a building. For what? So your tractor doesn't get wet?" "Dale, that's foolish. That's wasteful. Use that money for something productive. Buy more land. Upgrade your planter. Something that makes you money." "The shed will make me money," Dale said. "Equipment that's kept inside lasts twice as long. Maybe 3 times. Won't rust out. Won't have sun damage on seals and hoses. Won't have moisture getting into places it shouldn't. I'll save thousands in replacement costs over the years." Jim Carson snorted, a dismissive sound. He was 42, farmed 320 acres, had strong opinions about most things. "My dad farmed for 43 years, never had an equipment shed, just parked everything by the barn out in the open, never had a problem, never needed a shed. That's how it's always been done. Your dad replaced his tractor every 8–10 years, Dale pointed out calmly. Bought new or newer used, sold the old one, cycled through equipment constantly. "Yeah, because equipment wears out," Jim said, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "That's normal, that's farming. You use equipment hard, it wears out, you replace it. You can't make a tractor last 30 years, Dale, not with the hours we put on them. Not with the conditions we work them in. That's not realistic. That's not how equipment works." Dale looked at the 3 of them, at their confident smirks, at the certainty in their eyes that they were right and he was foolish. He didn't argue. Experience had taught him that some things you couldn't explain with words. You had to demonstrate with actions, with results, with time. "We'll see," Dale said simply. Then he got in his truck and drove home. Ed called after him, "Have fun wasting your money, Dale." More laughter followed Dale out of the parking lot. That night, Dale sat at his kitchen table with his wife, Sarah, going over the plans for the machine shed. Sarah was 37, had been married to Dale since 1950, understood her husband's careful, methodical approach to everything. "They laughed at you," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. They did. Does that bother you? Dale thought about it. Not really. They think I'm foolish. Maybe I am, but I don't think so. I think keeping equipment inside will extend its life significantly, and if I'm right, I'll save thousands of dollars over the years. If I'm wrong, I'll have spent $3,800 on a nice building that'll hold other things. Sarah smiled. You take care of things, they take care of you. That's what my mother always said. Your mother was right, Dale said. Over the next 8 weeks, through July and August of 1968, Dale built his machine shed. He did most of the work himself, hired help for the concrete work and the metal building installation, things he couldn't safely do alone. First came the site preparation and concrete slab, 30 feet by 40 feet, 200 square feet of workspace. Dale hired a concrete contractor to pour it properly, 6 inches thick, steel reinforced, with proper drainage slope toward the doors. That cost $200. Then came the metal building itself. Engineered steel trusses, galvanized metal roof and siding designed to last decades. 2 large sliding doors on the south side, 12 feet wide each, on commercial roller tracks. Dale did most of the assembly himself with help from 2 neighbors who didn't mock him. The building kit and doors cost $2,400. Electrical work, lighting, ventilation, another $200. Total cost $3,800. That was real money in 1968. Dale's entire gross farm income that year was maybe $18,000. He was spending 20% of his annual gross on a building to house equipment. His mocking neighbors heard about the costs and shook their heads. Waste of money, they said at the co-op, at church, at the cafe in town. The story of Dale Werner and his foolish equipment shed spread through the farming community like gossip always does. But Dale didn't care about gossip. When the shed was finished in late August 1968, he parked his 1963 Farmall 806 inside, drove it in, shut the big door, walked around the tractor in the cool, dim interior of the shed. No sun beating down on the paint, no rain to cause rust, no snow and ice to freeze into crevices, just a dry, protected space. Every night after fieldwork, Dale drove the 806 into the shed. Took an extra 5 minutes, but he did it religiously. Every morning, he rolled open the door and drove it out. When he wasn't using it, the tractor lived inside. His neighbors kept parking their tractors outside, exactly like they always had. That's what everyone did in 1968. You finished your work for the day, you parked the tractor wherever was convenient, by the barn, next to the corn crib, in the field if you were coming back tomorrow, and you went inside for dinner. The tractor stayed outside, weathering every storm, baking in every summer sun, freezing in every winter cold, rusting in every spring rain. Dale's tractor lived inside, protected, maintained, cared for. 5 years passed. By the summer of 1973, the differences were becoming visible to anyone who looked closely. Dale's 1963 Farmall 806 looked almost new. The paint was still bright red, International Harvester's distinctive shade, no significant fading, no rust on the hood or fenders or frame. The rubber components, the seat, the steering wheel, the hose connections weren't cracked from sun exposure. The hydraulic hoses were still pliable, not brittle. The tires still had the original sidewall flexibility. The engine ran perfectly, smoothly, no unusual sounds. The meter showed 4,100 hours. Dale's maintenance over 5 years had been minimal. Regular oil changes every 100 hours, grease fittings every use, occasional replacement of wear items. Total maintenance costs, maybe $800. The tractor looked and performed like it was 2 years old, not 10. Ed Thompson's 1964 John Deere 4020, which he'd bought brand new in 1964 for $8,200 and parked outside every single day since, looked rough. The distinctive John Deere green had faded to a pale, washed-out color. the UV radiation from years of sun exposure breaking down the paint pigments. Surface rust was visible on the hood, the fenders, around the grille, anywhere water could collect. The seat was cracked and sun-damaged, the vinyl split in multiple places. The rubber steering wheel had developed permanent cracks. The hydraulic hoses showed UV damage. Several had needed replacement. The engine ran, but not smoothly. Moisture had gotten into places it shouldn't have been. Ed had spent $180 on repairs and parts replacement in those 5 years, mostly fixing things that had degraded from weather exposure rather than from mechanical wear. Jim Carson's 1965 International 1466 told a similar story. Bob Mitchell's 1966 Case 930 was even worse. Bob farmed right on the Missouri River bottom where humidity was higher, and his tractor showed extensive rust damage after just 7 years. In 1976, 8 years after Dale built his shed, the differences were stark and undeniable. Anyone with eyes could see it. Dale's 806 still looked and ran like a tractor half its age. Ed's 4020 was worn out, used up, ready for replacement. Jim's 1466 was rusting badly, had developed electrical problems from moisture intrusion. Bob's Case 930 had been through so many repairs that Bob himself admitted it would have been cheaper to buy new. All 3 mocking neighbors bought new tractors between 1976 and 1978, convinced they had no choice, that their old tractors were done. Ed bought a brand new John Deere 4440 in the summer of 1976 for $28,000, financed through John Deere Credit at 9.2% over 7 years. His payment was $429 per month. Jim bought a new International Harvester 1086 in spring 1977 for $24,500, financed $376 per month. Bob bought a new Case 2090 in 1978 for $32,000, financed $487 per month. All 3 were making substantial equipment payments, committed to 7 years of debt service. The irony wasn't lost on Dale. His neighbors had mocked him for spending $3,800 on a shed, but they'd just committed to paying $28,000, $32,000 for new tractors, plus interest, to replace equipment that had worn out prematurely from lack of protection. Dale kept farming with his 1963 Farmall 806, parked in his shed every single night. By 1978, the tractor was 15 years old, had 6,800 hours on it, still running strong. Still looked respectable. The paint was showing its age now, some fading but no serious rust. Mechanically sound. Dale had maybe $2,400 total invested in maintenance over 15 years. Then 1980 arrived, and everything changed. Interest rates spiked to combat inflation. The Federal Reserve pushed the prime rate to 21.5% by mid-1981. The grain embargo devastated exports. Corn prices collapsed from $3.20 to $2.10. Land values that had climbed relentlessly through the 70s suddenly reversed, falling 40, 50, 60%. The farm crisis accelerated. Farmers with heavy debt loads, especially equipment debt, were immediately squeezed. Their payments hadn't changed, but their income had been cut in half. The math stopped working. Ed Thompson, with his $429 monthly tractor payment, plus his land payments, plus his other debts, was underwater by 1981. He missed his first payment in November 1981. Tried to catch up. Couldn't. By spring 1982, he was 4 months behind. The bank started foreclosure proceedings in June. Ed lost his farm in October 1982. The auction was on a cold Tuesday morning. Dale attended not to buy, just to pay respects to a neighbor. Watched Ed's new 4440, the tractor he'd bought just 6 years earlier for $28,000, sell for $9,200. Ed had paid maybe $18,000 on it so far between down payment and monthly payments, and it brought $9,200 at auction. The bank took that money, applied it to Ed's debt, and Ed still owed them. Ed and his wife Betty moved to Sioux City. Ed got a job at the IBP meatpacking plant. Betty worked at Walmart. They never farmed again. Their kids, who'd grown up on the farm, grew up in town instead. Jim Carson held on longer, made it until spring of 1984 before the bank foreclosed. His 1086, bought in 1977 for $24,500, sold at auction for $7,800. Bob Mitchell lasted until 1986. His case 2090 brought $11,200 at auction, less than half what he'd paid. All three neighbors who'd mocked Dale's shed in 1968 lost their farms in the crisis. All three sold equipment at auction for pennies on the dollar. All three moved to town, took factory jobs or retail jobs, left farming forever. Dale Werner kept farming. His 1963 Farmall 806 kept running. By 1985, the tractor was 22 years old, had over 9,000 hours on it, and still performed reliably. The paint was faded now, yes. There was some rust showing through on the hood. The seat had been recovered twice, but mechanically the tractor was sound. The engine had been rebuilt once in 1980. The clutch had been replaced twice. The hydraulic pump had been rebuilt in 1983. Total investment over 22 years, including the original purchase, maybe $8,500. His neighbors had spent $28,000, $32,000 on new tractors, made payments for years, and lost everything. Dale had spent $8,500 over 22 years and still owned his equipment free and clear. The shed had cost $3,800 in 1968. In 1985, Dale calculated what it had saved him. If he'd replaced his tractor every 8 years like his neighbors, he would have bought new or newer used in 1971, 1979, and would be buying again in 1987. Call it $25,000 per cycle in 1970s dollars, rising to $30,000 by the 1980s. That's $55,000, $60,000 he would have spent. Instead, he'd spent $8,500. The shed had saved him at least $50,000, probably more. In 1993, 30 years after Dale bought the 1963 Farmall 806, the tractor was still running, still being used, still parked in that shed every night. It was ancient by any standard, older than most farmers' career spans, but it worked. The paint was badly faded, rust visible in places, the sheet metal showing its age, but the engine, rebuilt twice now, ran. The transmission, maintained meticulously, shifted. The hydraulics, with replaced pumps and hoses, functioned. Dale had used that tractor for 11,400 hours over 30 years. Total cost over 30 years. Original purchase $4,200, maintenance and rebuild $6,800. Total $11,000. That's $367 per year average to keep a tractor running reliably for 3 decades. Compare that to his neighbors who'd bought new every 7 to 10 years, who'd paid $8,000, $32,000 per tractor over the decades. They'd spent $80,000, $100,000 or more on tractors over the same 30 years. Dale had spent $11,000. The shed they'd mocked in 1968, had been the difference. That $3,800 building had extended the life of Dale's equipment by 20 to 25 years. Compared to equipment stored outside. In 1998, after 35 years of service, Dale finally retired the 1963 Farmall 806. It still ran, but Dale was retiring himself at age 69. He'd bought a used International 1086 from an estate sale in 1994 for $12,000 cash, and that would be his final tractor before he retired. The old 806 got parked in the back corner of the shed, cleaned up, maintained, preserved. Dale couldn't bring himself to sell it or scrap it. Too much history. That tractor represented his entire farming philosophy. Buy quality, maintain it properly, protect it from the elements, make it last. Dale sold his 240 acres in 1998 for $1,650 per acre, $396,000 total. He'd farmed for 42 years with minimal equipment expenses because he'd taken care of what he had. Retired comfortable, debt-free, with substantial savings. Lived another 21 years, died in April 2019 at age 90. At Dale's funeral, his son Tom, who'd never farmed but had watched his father's careful approach to everything, gave part of the eulogy. In 1968, Dad built a machine shed for his tractor. Cost him $3,800, which was a lot of money then. His neighbors laughed at him, thought he was being foolish, wasteful, too precious about equipment. They said you couldn't make a tractor last 30 years. They said equipment wears out, you replace it, that's farming. Tom paused. Dad's tractor lasted 35 years. His neighbors' tractors wore out in 8, 10 years at most. Dad spent $11,000 total on his tractor over 30 years. His neighbors spent probably $100,000 or more, cycling through equipment constantly. He looked out at the packed church. More importantly, when the farm crisis hit in the early 80s, Dad survived because he didn't have equipment debt. His neighbors, the ones who'd laughed at the shed, they lost their farms, all three of them. Lost everything because they had payments they couldn't make on equipment that had worn out prematurely from being stored outside. Tom's voice got quiet. Dad kept that old Farmall 806 until I was 30 years old. It sat in that shed for 3.5 decades, protected, maintained, cared for. And it outlasted every tractor that was parked outside. The shed cost $3,800 in 1968. Over 35 years, it saved probably $60,000, $70,000 in equipment replacement costs. But more than that, it represented Dad's philosophy. Take care of what you have, and it'll take care of you. After the funeral, some people drove out to Dale's old farm to see the shed. The new owner had kept it, used it for the same purpose Dale had built it for. The 1963 Farmall 806 was still there, preserved in the back corner, a monument to longevity. One old farmer, a man named Vernon, who'd known Dale for 50 years, stood looking at the old tractor and shook his head. We laughed at him. In '68, when he built this shed, we thought he was wasting money, thought he was being foolish. Turns out he was the smartest one of us. That tractor lasted longer than some farming careers, and this shed, the shed we mocked, is still standing 51 years later, still protecting equipment, still doing exactly what Dale built it to do. The neighbors mocked Dale Werner's tractor shed idea in June of 1968, thought spending $3,800 on a building to house a tractor was foolish, wasteful, unnecessary. They parked their tractors outside and bought new every 8 years. Dale's 1963 Farmall 806 lasted 35 years because it lived in that shed. His neighbors' tractors rusted out in 8 to 10 years from weather exposure. Dale retired comfortable in 1998 after 42 years of farming. His neighbors lost their farms in the 1980s crisis, buried under debt for equipment that had worn out prematurely. The shed cost $3,800. It saved $60,000, $70,000 over 35 years. The mockers lost. The careful farmer won. EOF Python 3, C print F chars, CP home Claude, script 10, TXT, MNT, user data, output script shed, lasted. TXT. But the story of Dale's shed didn't end with his retirement. It continued, became almost legendary in Plymouth County farming circles, a cautionary tale told at coffee shops and grain elevators. In 2003, 5 years after Dale retired, a younger farmer named Marcus Peterson came to visit Dale at his home in Lamar. Marcus was 32, farming 480 acres, struggling with equipment costs. He'd heard stories about Dale's tractor that lasted 35 years and wanted to understand how. Dale, now 74, invited Marcus to drive out to the old farm with him. The new owner, a farmer named Jim Paulson, still used Dale's shed and had agreed to preserve the old 1963 Farmall 806 as part of the sale agreement. They stood in the shed, looking at the old tractor. Marcus walked around it, examining the paint, the frame, the components. The tractor was 40 years old now, hadn't been used in 5 years, but it still looked remarkably intact for its age. "I don't understand," Marcus said. My tractors look worse than this after 5 years. I've got a 1998 case that already has rust problems, hydraulic hoses cracking, electrical issues. It's only 5 years old and it's falling apart. This thing is 40 years old and still looks survivable. It lived inside, Dale said simply. Every night, every time I wasn't using it, it was in here, dry, protected from UV, protected from moisture, protected from temperature extremes. Marcus looked around the shed. But the cost, building this, maintaining it, wasn't it expensive? Built it in 1968 for $3,800, Dale said. Haven't spent a dime on it since except some roof maintenance in '89. Metal roof, concrete floor, good construction. It'll probably outlast me and you both. He walked over to the tractor, put his hand on the hood. This tractor cost me $4,200 in 1963. Over 35 years, I spent maybe $6,800 on maintenance and rebuilds. Total investment, $11,000. That's $314 per year to operate a tractor reliably. Marcus did the math in his head. He'd bought his case new in 1998 for $78,000 financed. His payment was $1,247 per month. Over 7 years, he'd pay $104,730, including interest. And in 5 years, his tractor was already showing significant wear from being parked outside. My neighbors in '68, Dale continued, they laughed at me for building this shed, said I was wasting money. They parked their tractors outside, replaced them every 8 to 10 years, spent $80,000, $100,000 on equipment over the decades. I spent $11,000 on one tractor over 35 years. What happened to those neighbors? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew. Lost their farms in the '80s crisis, all 3 of them. They had equipment payments they couldn't make when prices crashed. I didn't have payments. I survived. They didn't. Marcus looked at the old shed, at the old tractor, at the simple wisdom of protection and maintenance. I'm going to build a shed, he said. Dale smiled. Good. Your neighbors will probably laugh at you. Let them, Marcus said. Marcus Peterson built a machine shed that fall. 40 by 60 feet, concrete floor, metal building. Cost him $12,800, which was money he'd saved by not trading in his equipment as often as dealers recommended. His neighbors thought he was foolish, wasting money on a building. 10 years later, in 2013, Marcus's 1998 case was still running, still looking decent. His neighbors who'd parked equipment outside had already replaced theirs, some twice. Marcus had saved approximately $45,000 by making his equipment last longer through proper storage. The 2008 financial crisis hit agriculture hard, though not as catastrophically as the 1980s. Farmers with heavy debt struggled. Farmers like Marcus, who'd kept equipment costs down by building a shed and maintaining what they had, survived more easily. Dale Werner died in April 2019 at age 90. His funeral was large, over 400 people, including many younger farmers who'd heard stories about his approach to equipment and wanted to pay respects. At the reception after the funeral, a group of farmers in their 30s and 40s gathered around Dale's son Tom, asking questions about the shed, about Dale's philosophy, about how to make equipment last. Dad wasn't doing anything revolutionary, Tom said. He was just applying common sense that everyone used to know. Before the 1950s, before equipment became disposable in farmers' minds, people took care of things. They built barns for animals and sheds for equipment because protection extended life. Somewhere between 1950 and 1970, farmers started parking equipment outside, treating it as disposable, replacing it constantly. Dad never accepted that mentality. One young farmer, couldn't have been more than 30, said, "I'm paying $2,100 a month on equipment. Tractor, combine, planter, I'm drowning. I make the payments but barely. There's nothing left over." "How much of that equipment is parked outside?" Tom asked. "All of it. Don't have a shed." "How long you expect it to last?" The young farmer shrugged. "Dealer says I should trade the tractor every 5 to 7 years to avoid major repairs. Keep it fresh, he says. Tom shook his head. That dealer is selling you a cycle of perpetual debt. Trade every 5 to 7 years means you're always making payments, always owing, never getting ahead. My dad's tractor lasted 35 years because he protected it. Your equipment is designed to last that long too, but it won't if you leave it outside. The dealer knows this. He benefits from it. Another farmer spoke up, older, maybe 55. I knew your dad, knew him for 40 years. I was one of the guys who laughed at him when he built that shed in '68. I was 22, knew everything, thought Dale was an old fool wasting money. I'm 60 now and I finally understand. I wasted hundreds of thousands on equipment over the decades. Dale spent a fraction of that, and he retired comfortable while I'm still working, still making payments, still struggling. The man's voice broke slightly. I wish I'd listened in '68. I wish I'd built the damn shed. I'd be retired now. Instead, I'll probably die farming, still owing someone. The room went quiet. Then Vernon Schmidt, the old farmer who'd known Dale for 50 years, spoke up. He was 92 now, still sharp, one of the few from Dale's generation still alive. You want to know what made Dale different? Vernon said. It wasn't intelligence. A lot of smart farmers went broke. It wasn't hard work. Dale worked hard, but so did everyone else. It was time preference. Dale was willing to invest today for returns tomorrow. Spend $3,800 on a shed today to save $60,000 over 30 years. Most farmers wanted returns today, wanted to look successful now, even if it meant debt tomorrow. Vernon continued. Dale didn't care about looking successful. He cared about being successful. Those are different things. Looking successful meant having new, shiny equipment. Being successful meant owning what you had, having no debt, being able to weather bad years. Dale chose being successful over looking successful. Most farmers choose the opposite. The conversation at Dale's funeral reception lasted hours. Younger farmers taking notes, asking questions, trying to understand how to break the cycle of constant equipment replacement and perpetual debt. Tom shared his father's maintenance logs, his cost records, his systematic approach to equipment care. 6 months after Dale's funeral, 5 farmers in Plymouth County built equipment sheds. Within 2 years, 12 more. The idea spread. Farmers teaching farmers. The wisdom that had been mocked in 1968 finally being recognized as wisdom in 2019. The 1963 Farmall 806 still sits in Dale's original shed, now 56 years after he built it. The shed is still solid, still functional, still protecting equipment. Jim Paulson, the current owner, maintains it carefully. Occasionally brings people by to see it, to show them the tractor that lasted 35 years because one farmer in 1968 decided to build a shed and got mocked for it. The shed cost $3,800 in 1968. In today's dollars, that's about $30,000. Over 51 years, that building has protected millions of dollars worth of equipment, extended the life of countless machines, saved multiple farmers from the cycle of perpetual replacement debt. Dale Verner's neighbors mocked his shed idea in June 1968. They laughed at him for spending money to protect a tractor. They parked their equipment outside and replaced it every 8 years like everyone else. Dale's tractor lasted 35 years. Theirs rusted in 8. Dale retired wealthy. They lost their farms. The shed they mocked became legendary. The philosophy they rejected became wisdom. That's the whole story. That's what $3,800 spent wisely in 1968 can become over 50 years. In 2024, 56 years after Dale built his shed, a documentary filmmaker from Iowa Public Television came to Plymouth County to do a story about sustainable farming practices. Someone mentioned Dale Werner's tractor, the one that lasted 35 years, and the filmmaker was intrigued. Jim Paulson, who owned the farm and still maintained the shed and the old 806, agreed to be interviewed. The segment aired in October 2024, part of a series on farming wisdom. The filmmaker, a woman named Sarah Chen, who was 38 and had grown up in Des Moines, stood in Dale's shed next to the old Farmall 806. "This tractor is 61 years old," she said to the camera. "It was purchased used in 1963, farmed continuously until 1998, and still runs today. The farmer who bought it, Dale Werner, built this shed in 1968 specifically to protect his equipment. His neighbors mocked him for it." The camera panned across the shed, showing its solid construction, the concrete floor still level, the metal roof still tight, then back to the tractor. Dale's neighbors, who parked their equipment outside, replaced their tractors every 8 to 10 years, Sarah continued. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment over their careers. Dale spent $11,000 on this one tractor over 35 years. His neighbors lost their farms in the 1980s crisis, buried in equipment debt. Dale retired wealthy. Jim Paulson spoke on camera. "When I bought this property in 1998, the shed and the tractor were part of what attracted me. I'd heard stories about Dale Werner, about his approach. I wanted to learn from it. I've been parking my equipment in this shed for 26 years now. My 1994 International is still running strong, looks decent, because it lives inside. My neighbors replace their tractors every 7-8 years. I'm on year 30 with mine." The documentary segment went viral in farming communities. Within weeks, it had been viewed over 200,000 times on YouTube. Comments flooded in from farmers across the Midwest, many sharing their own stories of equipment that lasted decades when protected, or equipment that wore out quickly when left outside. One comment from a farmer in Nebraska: "My grandfather built a machine shed in 1971. Everyone said he was wasting money. His 1969 John Deere 4020 lasted until 2004, 35 years. I still farm with it occasionally. The lesson is simple: protect your investment." Another from South Dakota: "I built a 60x80 shed in 2015. Cost me $48,000. My neighbors said I was crazy. 6 years later, my equipment looks new. Theirs looks like scrap. I've already saved probably $30,000 in avoided replacement costs. The shed will pay for itself in 15 years. Then it's pure savings." The documentary had an unexpected effect. It started a shed-building movement among younger farmers. Companies that built agricultural metal buildings reported a 30% increase in orders in 2025. The idea that Dale Werner had been mocked for in 1968 had finally, 57 years later, become conventional wisdom. At a farming conference in Sioux City in March 2025, a panel discussion on equipment longevity featured Jim Paulson as a speaker. He brought photos of Dale's 1963 Farmall 806, maintenance records, cost analyses. The single smartest investment Dale Werner made wasn't buying a good tractor, Jim told the audience of 300 farmers. It was building a $3,800 shed to protect that tractor. That shed multiplied the return on his equipment investment by 3 or 4 times. It was the difference between farming for 42 years debt-free and losing the farm in the 80s crisis like his neighbors did. A young farmer in the audience, couldn't have been more than 25, raised his hand. "I'm just starting out. I've got $150,000 in equipment loans already. Everyone says that's normal, that's just farming now. But hearing this story makes me think I'm doing it wrong. How do I get off this treadmill?" Jim's answer was blunt. "You probably can't. Not quickly. You're already in the debt cycle. But you can stop making it worse. Build a shed, protect what you have, make it last. Stop trading equipment every 5 to 7 years like dealers want you to. Run your equipment 15, 20, 25 years. That's how you break the cycle. It takes time, takes discipline, but it works." Another farmer asked, "But equipment wears out. You can't really make a tractor last 25 years, can you?" Jim smiled. Dale's lasted 35. Mine's at 31 and counting. Yes, you can make it last. You just have to protect it and maintain it. The dealers don't want you to know this, but equipment is built to last decades if you take care of it. They profit from you replacing it constantly. Break that cycle, and you break their business model. That's why they discouraged Dale from building his shed. They knew it would hurt their sales. The conference session ran over by 45 minutes because farmers kept asking questions. How big should the shed be? Concrete or gravel floor? Metal or pole barn? How much does it cost? How long until it pays for itself? Jim answered patiently, but his main message was consistent. Don't overthink it. Build something solid that protects from weather. Get your equipment inside. That's 90% of the battle. Dale's shed wasn't fancy. It was just functional. 30 by 40 feet, concrete metal building, but it lasted 57 years and counting. Do that, and you'll save hundreds of thousands over your farming career. Dale Werner's shed, built in 1968 for $3,800 while neighbors mocked him, became one of the most influential structures in Plymouth County agricultural history. Not because it was grand or innovative or complicated, because it was simple, functional, and based on wisdom everyone used to know but had forgotten. Protect your investments, and they last longer. The neighbors who mocked it in 1968 lost their farms by 1986. Dale farmed until 1998 and retired wealthy. The shed still stands in 2025, still functional, still protecting equipment, still teaching the lesson its builder wanted to teach. Take care of what you have, and it'll take care of you.